Well, news just in that a chap called the Reverend Don Cupitt, champion of so-called non-realist theology, has just died aged 90. The Reverend Don Cupitt, he was an Anglican priest and philosopher at Cambridge University, where he lectured for 30 years or more, was a very, very scandalous figure for his theology, for what he taught about God, about Christianity. And he contributed to this notorious volume called The Myth of God Incarnate, edited by Professor John Hick. Now, the people who contributed to this volume were all Christians, actually, very eminent Christian theologians like Don Cupitt and Maurice Wiles, John Hick, and others, and basically arguing that traditional doctrines about God, even God's existence itself, are myths. Not all of them were atheists, but some, like Don Cupitt, arguably were. And I just want to share with you today's news in the Church Times. Here we go. Now, the Church Times tells us that Don Cupitt, champion of non-realist theology, dies aged 90. The Reverend Don Cupitt, Anglican priest and philosopher, whose BBC series, The Sea of Faith, brought him to fame and prominence in the 1980s. He was a fellow of Emmanuel College, Cambridge, lectured there for 30 years, and a leading non-realist thinker. What does this mean? We'll come to that in a sec. His philosophy, as summarized on his website, was that, quote, talk of God in transcendent and metaphysical terms belongs to an intellectual epoch that has long since passed. Realist doctrines of God have little or no credibility for a society shaped by contemporary scientific thought and the linguistic turn in philosophy, end quote. And the article continues, writing about his legacy last year, a professor of divinity at Cambridge, Dr. Catherine Pickstock, wrote that Cupitt, quote, broke with the musty hypocrisy of most Anglican liberal theology by pushing it to an extreme, thus exposing an elite agnosticism that was keeping its half belief to itself and not letting the masses into the secret, as if out of an apparently persistent fear that they might then misbehave. That's very witty. This was these words from 2024. So he wrote many books. Taking Leave of God was the name of one of them, published by SCM Press. SCM stands for Student Christian Movement, by the way. Taking Leave of God. Scrolling down here. Yeah, his best-known TV series, The Sea of Faith. He was very popular and well-known on TV at one point. In what form, if any, is Christian faith possible for us today? He said. So he had a merry time attacking the Christian faith. He created the Sea of Faith network, which is still apparently active even today. So he was a very, very notorious figure, as I say. So what is this non-realist theology that he was identified with? He wasn't the only one, but the most famous proponent. Well, I remember when I was an undergraduate at the University of London studying Christian theology, the Bible, historical Jesus, the creed, theology, all that sort of thing. And one of the other students there was a guy doing his PhD, and he was an actual Roman Catholic priest. So he was just doing his doctorate. He'd already been ordained to the priesthood. I got to know him, and what was interesting is that he said that he was a non-realist thinker. So I actually knew what that was, and I was really scandalized, because to put it in ordinary terms, a non-realist does not believe God exists. But it's more complicated than that, they claim, because they say that, well, the language about God, God's is based the existence of God, is really to do with language itself. There's no transcendent, metaphysical, mind-independent being who created the universe. Oh no, we know that's not true anymore. But the language of faith is still very beautiful and precious, and embodies values such as beauty and truth and goodness. So when they talk about God, and they will use the language of the creeds and the liturgy of the church, they're not meaning by those words what everyone else means. They have their own private interpretation of those words. So when they say I believe in, when everyone says I believe in God, Christians normally mean they believe in a transcendent creator. My friend at the college, the priest, when he says I believe in God, he means I believe in goodness, I believe in truth, I believe in beauty, you see. And that's subjective. It's not an objective reality that he is referring to. Arguably, this is quite scandalous, really. And it was a belief that rocked the church in the 70s and 80s with Don Cupitt, and is basically atheism, really. So why is a priest in the Catholic Church there at all? And he told me, I asked him, did you ever really believe in God as a transcendent reality? And he said he never did. And he became a priest because he was in love with the aesthetics, the language, the beauty, the liturgy, I don't know, the icons, the incense, whatever. And he dedicated his life to that. And I thought that was a bit scandalous, really. But there you go. So Don Cupitt, is a figure associated with Christian atheism, really. And it's surprisingly popular in Christian academic circles, amongst the clergy. But as the article pointed out, quoting that professor, the idea really is kept secret, really. It's not really shared with the masses. The fear is, I think, that somehow they will revolt and get upset if they knew that many of their priests were agnostic at best, or just unbelievers, atheists. So this chap has died age 90. I could go into non-realist theology in a lot more detail, but it really is a rabbit hole that I'm not interested in going down. It's basically kufr, unbelief, full stop. Let's not pretend it's anything other than unbelief. And I'm sure most Christians could agree with this as well. But what are we to do with Christianity today in the so-called modern world? Well, I'll leave the final words to this amazing author, an academic at Oxford University, Dr. Shabir Akhtar, in this marvelous book. I'm always going on about it, The Quran and the Secular Mind, A Philosophy of Islam. And on the back cover, the publishers say this about Dr. Shabir Akhtar: the author contends that Islam should not be classed with the modern Judeo-Christian tradition, since that tradition has effectively capitulated to secularism and is now a disguised form of liberal humanism. Okay, and this is profoundly true. Not all Christians are basically secular humanists, but if you look at the theology and the ethics, morality, the discourse of the Church of England and many others, even including the Catholic Church to some degree, you will see it's warmed over secular humanism with a religious veneer sort of sprinkled on top to make it seem nice and Christian. But the beating heart of it takes its cue, takes its teaching, takes everything really from the latest developments in the secular liberal West, whether it be LGBT, whether it be political issues. And some of these issues may be valid, whether it be sort of concern for the poor or housing or racism or so on. But the concerns are usually, the way they're understood is deeply secular, with, as I say, a veneer of religious language on top to sell it to the faithful, of course. How different is Islamic teaching? It is unchanged since the beginning, based on the Quran, based on the Sunnah and the four schools, of course. And it is the only, in my view, the only real alternative to Western secular modernity in the world, basically. Christianity, unfortunately, and I'm very, it is very sad it has done so, but it has sold the path to secularism. But Islam hasn't, and it remains the only genuine alternative, as I say, in the world. If you want to have godly values, traditional wisdom, a faith that takes God with the utmost seriousness. I can't tell you how serious Muslims take God. Christians a long time ago used to take God very seriously too, of course. but not anymore. Just a handful of people you might bump into. Muslims, nearly always, it's just normal for Muslims to take God very seriously. Why? Because he made us, he created us. We only exist from moment to moment because he wills it, and he will determine our destiny, our life after death, where we go to heaven or to hell. This is full-on, real-blooded faith, which sadly, as I say, has been largely gone. And even in fundamentalist Christian churches, really odd. I've noticed this in the UK and in the United States. You know, fundamentalist Christian churches have a very strong belief, you think, and they do, kind of. But the things that are missing from their preaching, from their books, normally is very rare to hear a fundamentalist Christian preacher talk about hellfire, the dangers of hellfire, or the day of judgment. They're much more likely to say, you know, Jesus loves you, God loves you. Maybe, you know, you'll get wealthy if you donate a bit to the church. And all these ideas, which are very kind of sentimental and really defenseless against critiques of that idea. You know, when someone suffers, sadly, when someone dies, the problem of evil, it's very difficult. And a lot of these Christians become atheists because their theology doesn't have any answers for these questions. Islam does. The Quran has very satisfying, very realistic answers to the problem of suffering and evil in this world. So even fundamentalist Christianity has become, has kind of adjusted itself to the modern age. We don't want to hear anything harsh, anything that might upset people. We want people to come into the church, so we don't talk about hell, hellfire too much, or the day of judgment. But Islam does. It's there in the Quran repeatedly, the realities of the afterlife, our destiny in paradise or in hellfire. It's at the center of faith, as it was in the center of faith of Jesus, upon whom be peace. If you read the Gospels, read Matthew's Gospel, Jesus speaks like a Muslim. The way his central concerns, his eschatological message, is very Islamic. His concern also for living from the heart, being sincere, loving your neighbor, obeying the law, God's law. This is the 613 commandments of the law. Very Islamic in character, actually, very unlike what you'll find in your average Church of England church, or even Catholic church or evangelical church today, sadly. So that is my thoughts on Don Cupitt, the champion of Christian atheism. Just to translate that headline from the Church Times, it's not non-realist theology, it's Christian atheism. What a contradiction in terms, of course. He was just died, aged 80, and his thought is very influential still today. And as I say, is basically kufr, unbelief. God, may God preserve us from such satanic ideas and keep us faithful on the straight path. Amen. And that's it for now.